Sean todos bienvenidos nuevamente al canal. El día de hoy vamos a hablar un poco sobre handicapping, sobre los términos básicos de handicapping, speed figures, algunos patrones, sobre lo que es el pace, y para que tengan una idea básica de todos estos términos. Para el día de hoy le tenemos un invitado, es DeSantis. Él es handicapper en Nyrabets y productor de contenido. Acá lo tenemos. Vamos a dar la bienvenida. Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
Hi, Siggy. Very nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and pleasure to talk to you about the basics of handicapping and getting more people interested in playing horse racing and understanding the basics so that they feel more confident when they place their bets on the races.
Yes. I said in the intro, we're talking about the basics of handicapping. Okay, but let's start with you.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit, how did you get involved with horse racing? Was when you were a kid, or?
Yeah. When I was little, my dad took me to the racetrack when I was about 10 years old in Pennsylvania, and we went to the Track Penn National, which is still in operation, and it is probably about 30 minutes from where I grew up. And so my dad took me out there when I was about 10, 11 years old, taught me how to read a racing form, and taught me a little bit about betting. And I remember there were 10 races on the card, and I did a $2 bet every single race with my $20. And at the end of the night, I had $32. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world, that I had made and won $12 over the course of the night. So I've been hooked ever since. I'm really fortunate. I have really good friends growing up who lived in Saratoga, in Louisville, Kentucky. So I'd go up to Churchill Downs or obviously the Saratoga track and be able to see racing, at different times of the year. So I've been a fan since I was a little kid, and it's a dream come true, honestly, to work in this profession and to be able to talk to people and get other people excited about horse racing the way that I was.
Pretty fine. Let's start with handicapping. Let's start with speed figures. We know the speed figure is just a number produced by the algorithm that quantify the ability or the effort of a horse on a race. That allows you to compare the efforts in different tracks and levels, and avoid us to compare raw final times. We have a lot of brands, of companies that produce or calculate these speed figures. We have Bio speed figures, Time for US, Brisnet, Equibase, the cheats. I don't know if I can remember another. Optic, can't remember it.
Yeah.
Yes. But what happened with that? They all have some different variables to calculate the number. But for a new horse player, at some point, buyer could say in a horse, improve 5 points. But then Time for US said, no, the horse ran a par. And the other, I said business could be another association, say, no, this horse regressed 2 points. And new players could go crazy with this situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things to keep in mind is that something like Timeform US, which is really, out of all of these, probably the most pace specific, really looking at how fast the horses ran the quarter, the half, the 3/4, the mile marks or ran in their races. What is difficult sometimes for new people using the form to understand is that sometimes the horse that finishes second will actually get a higher number in Timeform US than the horse that won the race. So you would go, well, wait a second, the horse that won should get the highest number, but that doesn't always happen because they really take into consideration how fast the pace was, and they take into consideration, if a horse was up on the lead going very, very fast and might have faded at the very end to second, that horse might actually get a better number than a horse that maybe just kind of took advantage of a really fast pace. So It can be confusing, and one of the pieces of recommendation I would give to anybody just starting is to stick to one number and stick to one company. And if you're just going to get into it, you just want to stick to buyer speed figures, just look at those and get really comfortable with that. Don't try to look at 3 or 4 different ones, or else you'll get confused.
Yes. Yes, time for US consider the pace.
Yeah, Timeform US, yeah, I mean, it definitely considers the pace. I mean, they all consider the pace on some level. I mean, all of them have that in their algorithm. Timeform US, I think, weights pace a little bit more, and they put a little bit more value and importance into it when coming up with the numbers. So that's what often leads to some disagreement between, what you might see from buyer speed figure and what you might see from Timeform US. But everybody has their preference. You know this. Everybody's got their favorite. Some people love buyer speed figures, others Timeform, others Brisnet, others the sheets. Optics EQ. All of those different brands have their fans. But the key is just to find one that you're comfortable with and really dive in and just focus on that at the start.
Fine. Now, let's see this. When you see the past performance, when you know a horse is candidate to bounce, to move forward, or to run just apart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think when I'm looking at a horse that could bounce, that's usually an indication when a horse runs a race that they've never run before, that they run a really good number. They run a much higher number. So let's say you see a horse that has been running in, I'm just going to use buyer speed figures, roughly in the 80s. And they run 82, 83, 84, and then suddenly they run 97. That number is probably going to regress the next time out. There's going to be a bounce because I don't think that horse suddenly became a new horse. In terms of candidates to move forward, sometimes you can look at things like track conditions. If a horse ran over a sloppy track or a wet track in their last race, maybe they didn't like that surface. And if they're getting back on a dry, fast track, they might be able to move forward from that effort. Obviously, then you also want to take a look at things like, how did the horse run its race the last time out? Did it have any trouble? Did it get, boxed in, or did the horse have to check? And so there's all sorts of trips that can also indicate that the horse could move forward. And then there's also just, again, when we talk about speed figures, if you see a horse that's just been consistently improving every single race, then there's a trend that you can start to see that this horse keeps getting better and faster every time out. And so at some point, obviously, that's going to stop. But, at some point, you want to also factor that into your handicapping. And then for par, I do think that's where trends are really important. And if you just see a horse that's been just running very consistently the last 4, 5, 6 times out, running roughly the same number, you feel pretty confident that they're going to run that number again or very close to it. And you're not really going to think that they're going to move up or move down all that much.
Fine. Well, Highland Falls ran the race of his life in the Jockey Local Cup.
Yeah.
Then he regressed, a bit.
He did. No, that's a good, and that's a great example of, in that Jockey Club Gold Cup, when Highland Falls ran that absolutely huge race, 2 things happened. One, he got a new jockey that day, Flavian Pratt.
Yes.
And who's one of the best jockeys in the world. And 2, he got the perfect trip. And he just sat right next to Arthur's Ride, who was the lead horse that day. And he was able just to stay right with Arthur's Ride and just pester that horse enough. And the 2 of them were able to really draw clear of the field and build up an advantage coming for home. And he just got the perfect trip. And then, as you said, in the Breeders' Cup Classic, not so much. That was a little bit of a tougher trip and obviously a different scenario.
Fine. Okay, let's see this. Well, the reality is, speed figures are a magnificent tool, a great tool. But the reality is, if you bet the higher speed figure in every race, on the long term, you lose.
Yes.
Yes. Now, beside the speed figures, another tools you use, another things you consider, pace, of course, and another things.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to consider pace. That's the very first thing I look at, even before speed figures. I'll look at pace and just trying to figure out which horses are going to be on the lead, which horses are going to sit more in the middle, and which horses are going to be on in the back. And if you just take a very quick look at the race and look at how horses have run their previous races, you usually get a pretty good indication of how the pace is going to play out. Obviously, you also have tools that help you with this as well. Something like Timeform US has a pace projector where it will show you what they project the pace to be on paper. Optics EQ has another outstanding pace projection surface there. So you can use those tools as well. But the old adage is pace makes the race. That the faster they go up front, the faster they go early, the more likely it is the horse is going to come from off the pace to win. When there's only one or maybe two horses that want to be forward, they can set their own fractions, they can set their own speed, and they can reserve energy coming for home. And it's harder for those horses in the back to make up ground. So, yeah, I mean, again, going back to the Breeders' Cup Classic, that was a prime example of pace makes the race. They went really, really fast in that race. They went way too fast. They went 45 seconds basically to the half mile, which is incredibly fast for a 1.25 mile race. And what ended up happening? All of the horses on the front end fell back, and you had a horse like Sierra Leone, who was sitting towards the back, be able to kind of come up and sweep by everyone to get the win. So pace is absolutely the thing that I look at the first. Even before I look at speed figures, I'll look at pace. But that's a huge indication of just how a race is going to play out. And I think that's a really, really helpful thing for people just starting off to become more comfortable analyzing is how does a race play out? You might not always be able to pick a winner, but I think it's a really important tool for you to look at a race and go, how do I think this race will be run? Who's going to be up on the lead? Who's going to be sitting mid-pack? Who's going to be further back? And then to watch the race and go, did that race go the way I thought it was going to go? And I think that can give you more and more confidence that you are handicapping the race as well and that you are analyzing things well. So pace is a huge deal. But then you can also look at things like form. How good has a horse been running recently? You could look at things like class, obviously, what level of races those horses have been running. And then getting into a little bit more advanced stuff, you can watch race replays. You can watch old races to see kind of what's been happening with these horses in their previous starts. So a lot of different things you can work on. But I think you set it up well. Speed figures, pace are really the number one and number two things.
Great. Another thing I want to talk is sometimes we see horses that recorded triple digits, for example, on a maiden special weight. Then when they move up in class, they don't run, they regressed.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, so that happens a lot. And
Yes.
there's a couple of reasons for that. So I would say first, there's a lot of reasons for that. So first, I'll say sometimes it's a matter of a lot of times trainers want their horses to win in debut. You know how important that is from a sales standpoint, from a pedigree standpoint. Winning first time out is so important, particularly at big tracks like Del Mar, Santa Anita, Saratoga, Keeneland. That's where, trainers and owners want to show off their young horses in those maiden special weight races. And they want to have a big first impression about how impressive that horse is. So a trainer will really sometimes get horses cranked up for that first race. And they will get them really, really ready for that. And they'll work them out a lot, and they'll start running off bullet workouts and all sorts of things. It is inevitable that their second start will be a little bit less because they just can't keep them at that level for multiple starts in a row. And so there's going to be a little bit of regression second time out. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is with these sort of maiden special weight races, your second race is against better competition. Obviously, you're facing against other winners now. So, you don't know how good the rest of that field was in that maiden special weight race. Maybe it wasn't that good. So you were able to get the perfect trip. Just go out up on the front end, run really fast, and no problem at all. And your second start, well, now you're running against other really fast horses, and maybe you don't get that same trip, and it's a little bit tougher, and you're going to regress a little bit. The other thing, and I would say the final thing, is a lot of times that second race is a little bit longer in terms of distance. So they're stretching these horses out from, 5.5, 6 furlongs, maybe that first race, to now 7 furlongs, maybe a 1-turn mile, maybe even a 2-turn race in some instances. We see that with our 2-year-olds in particular. Well, they might break their maiden going 6 furlongs, and then their next race is in something like the Breeders' Futurity, going a mile and a 16th, going 2 turns at Keeneland. So those are all factors for why a horse might regress a little bit that next start. But it is something that you really do see quite a bit. And you cannot assume when you see a horse win a maiden special weight race that they will be able to run that well or that fast in their second start.
Right. Some trainers likes to win early, right?
Yes.
Lucas doesn't care about that.
No. And that's a great point. So there are certain trainers, Todd Pletcher, Chad Brown, Bob Baffert, they win first time out. They're very, very good at getting their horses ready first time out. Brad Cox, another one, very good at getting their ready first time out. There are other trainers, Dwayne Lucas, Ken McPeak, Danny Gargan, terrible first time, Shug McGahee, awful at winning first time out. You never bet their horses first time out, and they usually let their horses, what we refer to as, run into shape. They'll let their horses run 2, 3, 4 times in some instances before you see the best version of that horse. So knowing which trainers get their horses really ready versus those who let them kind of gradually run into shape is a very important handicapping tool.
Yes, I see you use a lot of stats in your.
I do like my stats. Yes.
Yes. Well, and what are your most powerful angles when you cap a race?
So I would say one of the angles that I like to use quite a bit is the second time a horse is starting on a new surface and they are also stepping up in class. So a lot of times what happens, and this usually happens dirt to turf. So a horse will start their career running on the dirt and they might reach a certain level and not really be able to progress beyond that. And then they will switch to the turf and switch to running on grass. And usually in that very first race, there's an immediate, what we would say, perk up. They get a little bit faster. From a buyer speed figure perspective, you'll see the numbers get better. So they were running maybe in the 70s on the dirt, and suddenly they're running in the 80s or 90s on the turf. And so much faster. So the key is that the second time, you want to see that horse go up in class. So if they're running in an allowance race, maybe on the turf, ideally the next start, they're in a stakes race. And I say that because by stepping up in class, you're still going to get a pretty good price on that horse because it's a little bit more untested still at that level. If they come back in their second start and they're running at the same level, they're probably going to be the favorite or one of the top choices. So you might not get as much of a value. So I always like to second start on a new surface with a step up in class is something that I always like to see. And then I really like to see horses that I really like, young horses with gradually improving speed figures who have yet to run their best race. And so I like to find horses that have not yet plateaued and not yet leveled off, and where you don't know where their ceiling or their upper potential is yet. And again, I think a lot of times I use that because you can find very good value, very good prices on those types of horses as they continue to step up in class.
Very interesting. Finally, don't want to be. Just this is not capping mod betting, but you prefer to use more a caveman or your weight your opinions, all your opinions on a ticket. I know an ABC is tough, not easy to construct a ticket using the ABC.
Yeah.
But it's more useful.
It's very useful, and I do not caveman tickets. I like to do an ABC structure, and I like to keep my tickets affordable. I have a little expression that I like to say, which is bet small, lose small. And what I mean by that is you're not going to win every bet. That goes without saying. But if you're betting smart and you're betting like an ABC structure, that means your ticket cost is going to be pretty minimal. I love to play like pick threes and pick fours. They might only cost $6, $8, $12. So not much money. So if I lose, it's not that big of a deal. But if I win, now suddenly I'm winning with a $6 ticket or an $8 ticket, and I'm turning $6, and it doesn't have to be a huge hit, but I could turn $6 into $80 or $12 into $150. Those are big, that good return on investment. And so I'm not one of these people who presses the all button, or I'm not one of these people who, will include a favorite and 4 other horses in a race. If there's a really heavy favorite, in my opinion, if there's a favorite, like a 3 to 5 favorite, you do one of two things. You either single that horse, and that's the only horse you use in that sequence, in that race in the sequence, or you toss that horse out and you use alternatives to try to beat that horse. But when a horse is a really heavy favorite, I hate using that horse and including a couple of others. So I like to stick to that ABC structure. And I think it's a smart way it makes you a better bettor. And it also allows people who are just starting out to put together very affordable tickets. Whereas a caveman ticket, a lot of times you'll go online and you'll see somebody hit a big win, but then you look at how much the ticket costs. It costs $600. We're not doing that. So I don't. So I'd rather put together a little ticket that costs $10 or $20 and try to play that way.
And the reality is that you always like more horses than another. That's why you weight your opinions. Okay, now pretty well. It was 20 minutes. That's fine. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me, Siggy. Really appreciate it.
Fine. I enjoy this conversation, and see you next for sure.